October, 1347. 12 ships drift into a Sicilian harbor. No one waves from the decks. No one answers the harbor calls. When guards board, they find only the dead and the dying. Within days, the sickness spreads through Messina like wildfire. What if I told you, this wasn't just a plague? What if the Black Death never happened? The answer isn't just fewer deaths. It's a different world. A world where kings kept absolute power, where peasants stayed bound to the land forever, where the Renaissance might never have dawned. This is the story of the deadliest pandemic in human history, and the strange, uncomfortable truth about what it built. Because sometimes, catastrophe is also a doorway. The killer was tiny, a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It lived in fleas. The fleas lived on rats, and the rats lived on the ships of the Silk Road. For centuries, those trade routes carried silk, spice, and secrets. In 1346, the plague reached a Genoese trading post called Kaffa. Mongol forces laid siege to the city, camped outside its walls. Then the plague struck the attacking army instead. Desperate, the Mongols did something monstrous. They catapulted the corpses of plague victims over Kaffa's walls. Historians call it one of the first uses of biological warfare. Genoese traders fled by sea, carrying the disease with them. Their ships reached Sicily in October 1347. From there, the plague moved like ink through water. Sicily, then Italy, then France and Spain. By 1348, it reached England. By 1350, Scandinavia. No kingdom, no wall, no army could stop it. The symptoms were horrifying. Swollen, blackened lumps called buboes in the neck, armpit, groin, fever, vomiting, death, sometimes within days. In Florence, one of Europe's great cities, streets emptied overnight. The writer Boccaccio described neighbors abandoning neighbors, parents abandoning children. Bodies piled faster than they could be buried. Some people turned to faith in desperation. Groups called flagellants marched town to town, whipping themselves bloody, begging God to lift the curse. It didn't work. Nothing worked. By the time the plague finally eased, around 1351, an estimated 25 million people were dead in Europe alone. Some regions lost half their population. Worldwide, the toll may have reached 75 million. It remains, by percentage, the deadliest catastrophe in human history. Now imagine one small change. Imagine those Genoese ships never left Kaffa's harbor. Imagine local authorities, suspicious of the sickness aboard, turned the fleet away before it ever reached Sicily. It's not far-fetched. Port cities later invented exactly this idea. They called it quarantina, 40 days of isolation. But in our story, that instinct arrives one voyage too early. The ships are refused. Quietly, they scatter and burn. The rats, the fleas, the bacterium, all of it stays contained. Europe in 1347 never receives the knock at its door. No 25 million dead, no collapse, no empty streets. Just history, continuing as planned. To understand what's lost, you have to understand what came before. In the early 1300s, Europe was already strained. The Great Famine of 1315 had weakened millions with hunger, and still, the feudal system held tight. Peasants were bound to the land they worked, bound to the lords who owned it. Freedom simply wasn't part of the arrangement. Then the plague hit, and by grim accident, it broke the system. With a third of Europe's workers suddenly gone, the survivors became valuable. Genuinely, urgently valuable. Peasants could demand wages for the first time in generations. They could leave a bad lord for a better one. Some historians call it the birth of the free labor market. But in our story, none of that happens. The workforce never shrinks. Labor stays cheap. Peasants stay replaceable. Lords have no reason to bend, no reason to pay more. The rigid feudal hierarchy doesn't crack. It calcifies. Serfdom doesn't fade out over centuries. It just continues. And here's the part historians actually point to as proof. In Western Europe, the real plague weakened feudalism fastest. But in Eastern Europe, the death toll was often lower. And there, serfdom didn't loosen. It tightened for centuries more. Russian and Polish peasants remained legally bound to land into the 1800s. That's not a guess. That's the historical record in one continent. Now stretch that outcome across the whole of Europe. A single class of landless, powerless laborers, permanent. No merchant class rising to challenge old nobility. No new money disrupting old bloodlines. Meanwhile, the church loses nothing of its authority. In the real timeline, the plague did something unexpected to faith. Priests died at the same rate as everyone else. Prayers hadn't saved them. People noticed. That quiet doubt planted a seed, one that grew into the Reformation. In our world without plague, that seed is never planted. The Church's authority over daily life remains near absolute. No crisis of faith, no Martin Luther nailing his theses in 1517. Or if he does, there's no fertile ground of doubt to receive it. Now look further out, to the Renaissance itself. Historians still debate this one, but the theory is compelling. With labor scarce after the plague, wealth concentrated in fewer hands. That surplus wealth funded art, architecture, scientific curiosity. Florence's Medici family built their fortune in this very era. Without that shock to the old order, does the money still concentrate the same way? Does Florence still bankroll its great artists? Maybe. Maybe not. But the timeline shifts, by decades, easily. Push it further, to 1492. Columbus sailed west, funded by a Spain reshaped by post-plague economics. New wealth, new ambition. A continent hungry for change. Delay the Renaissance by even 50 years. Columbus might not sail until the 1520s or 1540s, if at all. European colonization of the Americas doesn't happen on our timeline. The map of the modern world, quite literally, redraws itself. Empires rise and fall on different centuries entirely. Languages spoken across entire continents today might never spread. And back home, the population itself tells a different story. Europe's population didn't return to pre-plague levels until the 1500s. Without the collapse, that growth simply continues on schedule. Remember the Great Famine? In this world, it isn't a warning. It's a preview. A crowded, hungry Europe with no population crash to relieve the pressure. Some historians argue that pressure might have triggered a different crisis entirely. Not a plague. Perhaps a war. Perhaps a famine deeper than 1315's. Nature, it seems, often finds a way to rebalance the scales. So a world without the Black Death isn't simply a world spared. It's a world where the reckoning just gets postponed. Now, it would be easy to end the story there. Too easy. Because let's be honest about something uncomfortable. It can sound like this video is arguing the plague was secretly good. It wasn't. Not for a single one of the 25 million who died. Grief doesn't care about historical silver linings. A mother in Florence burying 3 children in 1 week gained nothing. The economic benefits took generations to even appear. And the people who suffered most never lived to see them. There's also a darker chapter historians don't skip. Amid the panic, Jewish communities across Europe were falsely blamed for the plague. Accused of poisoning wells. Accused with zero evidence. Entire communities were massacred in cities across the continent. That tragedy is not a footnote. It's part of this story too. And some historians push back on the whole premise here. They argue capitalism and scientific thinking were already emerging before 1347, that the plague accelerated changes already quietly in motion. So maybe the honest version isn't, the plague built the modern world. Maybe it's this: catastrophe reveals what was already cracking. The idea of a fair wage, the decline of rigid class systems. Even the word quarantine, from the Italian for 40 days, is the plague's quiet legacy. All of it traces back to those 12 ships in a Sicilian harbor. History rarely moves in straight lines. Sometimes it takes catastrophe to force open a door that was already stuck. So the next time something feels like it's ending the world, remember, it might just be building the next one. The greatest questions in history aren't about what happened. They're about what almost didn't. This is Oviora. Keep wondering.